countryside in Bihar and make a revolution. So we were, part of this Naxalite group. In fact, my next book, which is a long, delayed book, I've written 2 chapters. Signed the contract with Penguin many years ago. Is on my memoirs as a Naxalite. I spent about 2 years in the movement and going around. So I was a Naxalite, and the revolution of course collapsed, and I was rescued from the movement by Arun Asaf Ali, the famous freedom fighter, who used to run this left-wing newspaper establishment, the Link Patriot establishment. And Patriot was a newspaper and Link was a magazine. And Nikhil Chakravarti was also associated with it, and he had his own magazine called Mainstream. So all these people got together and decided to rescue me or rehabilitate me. Anyway, so I got into journalism, which seemed to be the kind of only thing I can do. Didn't want to go back to college. And I suddenly found my first memory is that instead of cops chasing me, I started chasing the cops, because you start out as a crime reporter, so it was fabulous. Crime reporting was so interesting. I will send you a link to an article which I did for the seminar 20 years ago on those days, to give you some idea of my relationship with the old days in the Patriot and what was it in reporting those days. But anyway, so it was going very well for me. Really enjoyed journalism, loved writing crime stories, investigating crime stories, variety. When of course the emergency came, and then of course the entire situation changed. And I remember the first day of the emergency. It was quite crazy because just the evening before was my first big political story. And this was 1975. I was all of 23 years old, and very, very proud that I had been given the main first lead political story to do, and it was the famous Jayaprakash Narayan rally speech. And mind you, I worked for a paper which was anti-Jayaprakash Narayan, because we belonged to the left-wing Soviet, pro-Soviet, stream, and we thought this was, the paper thought that, it was quite suspicious, may have had CIA links, Jayaprakash Narayan and whatever. So, and in fact, I found that JP was quite actually worried about the movement not taking off, and he was, really complaining that it should be much more widespread. And so I wrote a nice piece, with a little bit of political angle. Very proud that I was doing my political story. And next morning I found the papers had not been delivered, and I was really annoyed. Anyway, I rushed off to office, and as I was walking in, this guy, a senior reporter, was coming out, and he said, don't talk too much, there's an emergency. I said, what? I had no clue. They said, there's an emergency. I said, at that time there was an external emergency in any case, with some tension on the border. He said, no, there's an internal emergency. So I went in, complete darkness in the office, no electricity, everybody sitting around looking absolutely shattered and devastated. And then it dawned, the whole thing of the emergency dawned. And it was quite a crazy situation. Only my chief editor is a crazy Malayali, old school Marxist, who thought that the right wing had got his comeuppance and everything. Of course, later he turned really against Sanjay Gandhi, and the Youth Congress came to burn down our office. But that's another story. But at that point we were all devastated. We didn't know what hit us, and we slowly sort of went around the city and found that the opposition, including city opposition leaders, left, right wing, socialists, everybody in jail. And it was like crazy, Even the Congress guys we knew got completely shell shocked and they didn't know what had happened. And of course, I mean, this whole thing had been marked before we knew Sanjay Gandhi was getting more powerful, and and there was Mrs. Gandhi being quite besieged by the Allahabad High Court judgment, and but we never expected that sort of thing to happen because this was so not, so against the sort of grain of what we knew Indian democracy to be. So I think that was the start, and then of course you had the ridiculous situation of us going to Shastri Bhavan and taking our copies to get them vetted by some information officer or something who had no clue about a clue, and he kept on apologizing to us, saying that because those days press was really respected, unlike today. And they really looked up to us, even as young reporters, and they were feeling very sheepish and very guilty, these information officers, but saying, we have to do this. They didn't really know what to do. They didn't. Their English wasn't good enough, so we ran circles around them for the first few days. Just constructing our sentences in different manner. But I think very soon we got caught out, and they decided to go for the self-censorship thing. So you were left to, your own devices, but you would pay if they felt it was anti-government. So basically that took care of any kind of reporting, because we all know that reporting mostly is what's wrong with the world, and this was extended to every damn thing. Even murder, shurder, local cops, took this as a great advantage, that even if it wasn't political, they would say that you can't, report anything which created a bad impression of the police. So if an investigation was slow and, you wanted to report it, nothing to do with Indira Gandhi or Sanjay Gandhi, the cops would. And in fact, that in many ways is the story of the emergency, because a lot of the things that happened in the emergency weren't out of what Sanjay Gandhi or Indira Gandhi or the cabinet decision. It was actually these little replicas of Sanjay Gandhi who cropped up, all around, and they started carrying out their own private kind of vendettas, because there was no free press, and there's a, atmosphere, as they called it, a mahol. There was a real atmosphere of fear, and the new normal, which is something which we are hearing today, because the new normal, is a word which I'm hearing after 40 years. So we all cope with it. It was particularly difficult when Turkman Gate happened, because, and that is the kind of spearhead of our book. And we were all there watching, far away, of course. But we knew that there was a big riot going on, and there was gunfire, there was, huge amount of shouting, and we could sense the tension. And later, of course, we investigated it thoroughly, and, that's how we got all those details. And I wrote almost a semi-fictional account, in the sense that I put it in a narrative of people actually, women getting molested and raped and harassed, and people dying, and, innocent people being, dragged to the sterilization theaters. And, this whole family planning thing again, this CNN reporter recently is wanting to do a story on sterilization. So she came to me and so wanted to have some help and had a chat. In fact, wanted to know whether she could speak to some survivor, who got sterilized, is still alive. But of course, the whole thing about sterilization was that there was a lot of stigma attached to it, that you lost your manhood. So no guy would admit that he was sterilized, but he would say, I know somebody who's got sterilized. And of course, there were excesses because there were quotas. And again, these are mindless quotas which were set, and they kept on increasing, and so everybody started competing with each other about how many, cops, for instance, they were told you'll get promotion if you've got to get so many sterilizations. So it went completely out of hand. But in hindsight, and other day, in fact, Sharad Yadav, who was in jail and, who had his own political network, and Sharad was saying in Parliament that a lot of it was exaggerated, meaning the extent. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize the sterilization, but because 1,000 became hundreds of thousands, because there was nowhere people could know, and that became the big sort of, buzz about the emergency. That was the bugbear of the emergency. So, sterilization, and that's something which happened in Delhi quite a lot because they kept on revising the targets, and it's startling if you look at the Shah Commission inquiry and see the cold figures, how the thing which was done first by the central government of the quota, how it got escalated by the state government, and that itself got overachieved by this thing. It's really amazing. That tells you the story of what really went down. But of course, it was also exaggerated, and not reporting any of this. Okay, so we just watched helplessly, and it was a terrible feeling. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, the sheer impotence of the media. I mean, there was some kind of underground media, but that is where it's so different from today when you have the social media, and you can't think of being cut off like that anymore. Huge difference here. So that was one thing, and then of course came the decision about the elections. I mean, the other thing which we found was the demolitions, because I think in Turkman Gate both came together because they were demolishing all these ghettos and these slums. So now, and this again is a classic thing, on the face of it, beautification of the city and slum clearance and a family planning program, these are like ordinary developmental programs, and there's nothing wrong about it per se. But the way they went around it, and just shoved people out in the wilderness. One of our chapters is called Out in the Wilderness, and these are all these resettlement colonies. And there was nothing there. There was no infrastructure there. And people just, people who've lived in communities for decades, sometimes in the old walled city for centuries, they were just shoved out there. And as far as the walled city is concerned, I think there was also a little Muslim bias. I mean, anti-Muslim bias. There is no question. Jagmohan denies it. That he said that are you mad that we are going to allow this Pakistan to be formed again? Because some of those guys said, why can't you, if you have to move us to the same place? So Jagmohan apparently said, according to one of the residents who we quoted, Chaudhry Kaimuddin, that he said that, are you mad? We are going to destroy Pakistan to make another Pakistan. So I think there was a bias there, but generally it's the poor, and of course if you're more vulnerable, you're a minority, then it becomes even worse. You were just dispersed to all these resettlement colonies. Again, the paradox is that today these resettlement colonies, the people who have these houses, are blessing the stars. They have their houses because they all have houses, and it's grown. So it's quite amazing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the resettlement colony. They just could have just got that infrastructure there. So for that year or year and a half or 2 years, they were completely sort of shattered. But they grew up. I mean, human beings adapt, and now of course, they're all worth something, and they have, a place, and they can rent it out or live there. And so, okay, so then we come to this decision by Indira Gandhi to hold elections. And of course, in the beginning, everybody felt that it would be staged elections. I remember Chaudhry Charan Singh saying that, it was staged hoga. And these opposition guys, were, I think, at that point very, very nervous about contesting. They had no organization. They had been jailed for so long, and there was a general feeling that they would sweep. There's a little consternation when Babu Jagjivan Ram, and Bahuguna walked out of the Congress. So that was the first time people felt that maybe the Congress is not such a monolith. Maybe the Congress, but then nobody else left. So even after they left, there were still doubts. I personally got convinced when not very long before the elections, we had Indira Gandhi's boat club rally. Those days boat club was the place where you held everything. So there was this rally, lunchtime rally, because lunchtime we got all the sort of government employees were sort of in surrounding sort of government offices. So while she was speaking, people started walking out. And Mrs. Gandhi was furious. I mean, in her entire political career, she'd never seen this happen. Furious. And it was something else to see, I mean, it was amazing to see people just turn their back and walk out. And then I knew something's happening. I mean, there's something, new. And then, of course, we saw the results, and it was amazing. I can't tell you how amazing it was. I mean, just the sheer exhilaration, the sheer sense of freedom after those 19, 20 months of just being in a prison. And that's the context in which we wrote our book. I mean, I always thought that we should use our notebooks, usually. And so John was a fellow reporter, so then both of us got together and, we wrote this book, wrote the book in 19 days.
What?
19 days.
Really?
Because we wanted to really be the first. Of course, that didn't turn out so well, because I'll tell you what. So, we were two young rookie reporters. I was 24. I was 24, and John was about 28. And we were, those days, those ages in journalism were nothing, because it was really, I mean, it's not like today where as a youngster you can make it quite big. And to write a book, to write, get a publishing house, and those days there were hardly any publishing houses. So there was Vikas. And Narendra Kumar, when we showed him the manuscript, he was very thrilled. He said, "This is fantastic. But I am first book by Kuldeep Nair, then Janardhan Thakur, then Pramila Kalan. These were like huge names, big guys." So we went to a publisher called Somaya's. Chapel Kuni Krishnan was there, sort of, man in Delhi, very sweet fellow and everything. Everything was set when last moment. Somaya's had some sugar interests in Maharashtra where there was still a Congress government, and they got scared. So they backed off. So you won't believe this, at the last moment we were walking the streets of Daryaganj, where all these publishing houses, and we found one poor chap who had a publishing house curiously called SSS. And that was, I think, the sort of, he was Surinder Singh Soni or something like that. That desperate, okay? But he was ready to publish the book, and so we got the book published. George Fernandez released the book. I mean, the book was a real sort of hit, and we got fabulous reviews. I mean, you read those reviews, only the Beatles book is almost as good reviews. But I mean, it was really great. I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had great reviews even for my Mayavati book, Veggie. But anyway, I mean, that was like very special. George at that time was such a figure. I mean, spoke so well. He was fresh out of jail, just become minister, and he was, his rhetoric was quite incredible. So anyway, so that happened. So, of course, I mean, the whole thing changed. I mean, journalism changed. You had this investigative, journalism starting in a big way. Arun Shourie came, India Today, and then MJ Akbar, who, from my school, he persuaded me. But those days, I'd suddenly become a star. I had this Guardian thing, and then, of course, there were a lot. Arun Shourie was very keen that I join Indian Express, but Mulgaonkar had a problem about whether I could work for the Guardian and the Indian Express at the same time. and it was a no-brainer because Guardian those days gave me $5,000 a month, and I just got married, so there's no question, you know. So, so yeah, I mean, I joined Sunday as chief of Delhi bureau. I, you know, it was great covering everything. We did so many investigative stories, in-depth stories, um, and the government was leaking like a sieve because there were different factions. Everything it was an ideal situation for a reporter. I mean, because everybody was speaking against everybody. So from this, and you just imagine the contrast. I mean, from this absolute blanket ban on news, we were like into this period of Charan Singh fighting against Jagjivan Ram, Moraji Desai, the RSS getting in and trying to do that dual membership. So every day there's an issue. We've been briefed by Madhu Limai. I mean, we had access to the top leadership. So it was a great period of journalism, and particularly coming as it did after the emergency. And then, of course, Mrs. Gandhi came back. This whole thing collapsed. But, interestingly enough, I don't think, messed around with the media anymore. I think she had learned her lesson. And the media continued, as it were. And they, of course, had to appreciate it. There's no question. I must say that she was very kind to me, Mrs. Gandhi, because she knew that I had written a book against her son. But I used to go and meet her because I was there, one of the few people who was there when she was arrested for the first time. I got this great scoop along with Chand Joshi. The two of us were there, and when Sanjay Gandhi went crazy, slapped Mandira Puri, Arun Puri's sister, because she was the photographer and taking photographs and things. But and then I followed her when she was arrested and everything, and she was really in control. She played the CBI guys, such a drama queen she was. But she was also somebody who had the sense to meet this young reporter, talk to him, and also realize that she needed good publicity. So she'd be quite nice. This is an opposition, mind you. All these people change completely in the opposition. So, so I spent some time with her, talking to her and everything. And when she came, I followed her on election trail also, and she was fantastic. To see her to make that comeback, was just astonishing. Just the sheer intensity of somebody who wasn't all that young. She would, we would be, following her the whole day, and we'd be absolutely, completely bone tired. But she was there going, and it was remarkable that comeback after being totally destroyed, being defeated, crying, absolutely shattered, and fearing that she'd be jailed forever. To make that comeback was something else. But the media, it wasn't going back to the emergency, certainly. It was politics as usual. And, and you had nuances like N.T.R. Ramarao just at that point when she was coming back, that, he sort of arose and, he managed to, do his own little drama in Andhra Pradesh. So it went on. In terms of, I'm just carrying on. You should ask me questions, in case.
I want you to finish what you have to say because
right.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. No, I'm just trying to think how where do because there's so much to talk about really in terms of where the media. To some extent, you're looking at the media, right?
Yeah, we are looking at journalism and reporting during and how it changed after the emergency.
So your focus is that. So I think the media, if I look at it, it's the emergency certainly changed, the way the media looked at politics, looked at investigative journalism. Now, on the one hand, it gave it a huge boost to journalism because I think nothing was sacred anymore, and you understood that we needed to really investigate stuff, what was happening. And then magazines came into play, and magazines could obviously give much more in-depth coverage. I mean, in Sunday, for instance, what we used to do, we used to have one cover story, and that cover story was almost the entire magazine. So you could, I wrote stories, meaning there would be 3-4 stories I do, including an interview, including an in-depth analysis, then a general broad story, all kind of which complemented to the cover story. So that just wasn't there before. That was a complete new sort of thing in journalism. And India Today also did the same thing. But the flip side was that I think that some of the stuff which we were taught as young reporters before the emergency came into play, the Indian newspapers functioned a lot like the British media, and there were some very strong checks to, say, a young reporter like me who think the world of himself, in me at the age of 20, 21. Excuse me. So somebody like me, I'd have all these ideas of great, stories, and also writing, fancy stuff. And you'd have a grizzled old chief reporter who would tell you that, "PaRChA, all right, you're smart, you went to Stephens and you did your stint in the Naxalite movement, but forget it, yeah. I mean, this is a news report. Huh? So come down to the ground, get your first 2-3 paragraphs of news in." So he had that strong filter. This guy, and so a lot of the, this whole ego thing, which you find youngsters really nobody to restrain them completely, and this whole thing of fact checking, of cross checking, no single source story. So there was this thing: where did you get the story, and have you checked it? So there's this tremendous emphasis on facts. And then, of course, you have the news editor or the chief sub-editor. And they, firstly, had a very low opinion of reporters because they were stuck doing the dirty work, and the reporters had other fancy things. So they'd throw back the copy at you, saying, "What crap have you written here? What is this nonsense? Who do you think you're a novelist? You're Tom Wolfe?" Huh? I mean, so there were these checks and balances to us. Now, that started going, because it became such a glamour job. When I joined journalism in 73, journalism was not really a glamour job at all. It was very difficult to get a byline. In PaRChA, we never got a byline. No bylines at all. The policy was no bylines. So there was none of this, individualistic personality cult which, reporters have now and correspondents have. So it was a much more blood and guts type of, business journalism. And I think that some of that started getting lost because I think the media started getting ideas about itself, after the emergency was over. Because the media was restrained and we became free again. And we, and I think people like me are perfect examples because we completely broke the usual thing. I jumped, pitchforked, God knows how many lines, and became somebody who, was a well-known journalist. I had to wait for that. So on the one hand, there is a plus side, there's no question about that. But on the other hand, there is this kind of slightly egoist attitude to news and opinions, and so all that started creeping in. Much less than what used to happen. What happens now, much less. But because there were still filters and there were still good news editors, there were still good chief reporters. But it started happening. The other thing that happened, and Arun's going to kill me for this. I don't know. The university things are probably in the archives and not published in an article. But the Arun Shourie style of journalism. Now, the great big sort of Antule leaks, that was the first really big investigative, stuff which the media did in Indian Express. Now, we were used to investigative journalism earlier by going to a source we had cultivated and developed over the years, who would quickly show you one portion of the file. He'd say just quickly see it and that's it. There were no smartphones in which we could take a copy or anything, but we had to memorize it very quickly, but roughly to authenticate, and then he'd give you a debriefing on what had happened. Arun had the whole thing, all the documents tied up in a ribbon delivered to him. He'd call in a reporter, hand him over the thing. The reporter would have the entire material, and then Arun would tell him how to write it. Now that, I think, to some extent became problematic, because obviously I'm not denying that a lot of it was very authentic. But on the other hand, this had a certain angle, this had a certain bias. It wasn't just reporters going in and getting their stuff. Mm-hmm. And when I look back, I think that a lot of the slanted journalism you see today was born at that time. So, and again, I want to say that I'm not trying to at all minimize the achievements of this journalism, because they did bring down Antule government, on a genuine issue. So it wasn't that it was false or fake or anything. I'm just trying to look at the parentage of certain sort of, stuff which happens today, and from that time. So, so I think those were sort of disturbing sort of, starts in journalism, although journalism was getting such a great boost. And then, of course, you had some instances like Punjab, when the Golden Temple operation, and that was very worrying, because I was there, right there. I actually had the last interview with Bindrawale and Shabik Singh and Amrit Singh. Mark had the one which was previous. But Mark was such a clever old fox. He knew that they were going to cut off electricity. So he got out and managed to do one broadcast. By the time I came back, everything was cut off. But what we saw there in Punjab, the army went freaking mad. Because that first assault they did, they got absolutely mowed down. So it was really, I think, it was a big blow to the army's ego, and they went mad. And the kind of human rights violations at that time was really terrible. And this was not like Nagaland or Mizoram where all these things are happening. It was Punjab. And later we saw that replay in the anti-Sikh riots in Delhi, in the capital. And I don't think the media really did a proper job of it, because I think the media was scared, media was under pressure, And although it wasn't the emergency quite, but you could see that, there were some pressures coming into media, and national security then became the big buzzword. Mm-hmm. What now has become a normal thing, so anti-national. So you couldn't sort of report that. So I had to be a little careful, because I was writing for a foreign paper, so obviously Guardian would be interested in all these stories, and I did a lot of stories. But, you all have to be, careful. I know that this guy called Brahm Chalani, who was Associated Press, who's now become a big strategic thinker, columnist. He got into trouble, really. I think his press accreditation was cancelled because he did some fairly explicit stories on how the Sikhs were being sort of really, and it was really sad, what happened. They just sort of lined them up. Again, today you won't even think about it when these things happen on a routine basis in UP.
Yeah.
But those days, it really sort of really sort of surprised you. So so that happened in '84, and then after that, of course, when we had Rajiv, and I must say this for Rajiv. He's a hell of a decent guy. I mean, I think he's a hell of a decent guy. I mean, I got to know him well while touring. I went abroad, foreign tour, and I had some good friends who were his ministers, like Madhura Sindhya, and these are personal friends. And I mean, I must say that despite that brute majority, they didn't mess around with the media. He tried with that defamation bill, but a very clumsy try, and he backed off like, mad when everybody protested. I think the swiftness with which he withdrew from that defamation bill just shows that he wasn't really into trying to impose any kind of controls on the media.
Right. So what I want to do is I want to rewind and we'll go back to your days in Stephen. You joined Stephen in 1970. Okay. One of the reasons that were given for imposing the emergency was that it was threatening to the internal security, and all of those conversations came in. And of course, the Naxal movement was also something that was in the mind, and PaRChA was one of the people who suggested the emergency.
Indeed.
So how was it that in this very mainstream university of Delhi University, and we now generally see JNU as this bastion of Naxals, right? So what is it that incorporated you into this Naxal movement? What was your role in it?
So I'll tell you, I mean, that's the first chapter of my book. But it's very interesting, the Stephanian Naxalites. It's a very interesting niche Naxalite, movement, because it started out as a sub-nationalist movement. It started out among students who came from the east and a few from the south, people who did not go to Doon school. I think it started out as an anti-snobbery thing. It started out as a Dara Singh movement. I'll tell you why, because these guys used to go and see Dara Singh movies in the cheap seats. There was no Marxism at that point. But it was this whole thing of all these Anglophile guys really sort of, making Stephens into this complete oasis, It wasn't even a part of Delhi University politics or anything. And all the Stephanians wanted was to make it with the girls in Miranda House. Okay, I mean, that was like, it's not that we didn't want to also. But, it was like, but it was like that was the only purpose. And I think that what happened was that this developed into, in the mid-60s, there was this huge famine in Bihar. And the Stephens guys, this was before my time, went as a part of these, charities, sort of, students were being taken around, the famines and famine zones and things. And I think a lot of them were completely struck by the sheer poverty, the inequities, of rural India. And some of them, like Bankar Roy, went on to do, social work in a completely different way. Some of them got politicized. And then came the late 60s, where the Naxalite movement started, and the whole world went up in flames. There was the Paris Commune, the music had changed, there was anti-Vietnam protests, Beatles. I mean, revolution in the head. I mean, so we were like that generation. So everything was happening around, and Stephens, of course, being quite influenced by international situation as well. I think the Naxalite movement was spawned there. There were also two specific people. One was Ajit Pal, who was the head of the psychology department, who actually deliberately encouraged Miranda House and IP girls and Stephens boys to become, radicalized. And there was Ranjit Goa, who was famous for his subaltern politics later, who, with this very famous Bengali accent, kill, 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 landlord's head on a bamboo pole. He would just so so there were these two well-known academics who were really fomenting it, and even people like Amartya Sen and all these people who were leftists were quite enthused by these fresh winds which were blowing through the leftist movement through students. So that's how it happened.
Right. So, when you call yourself Naxal, what was your nexus with the Naxalite movement, or did you
We,
just call yourself Naxal in terms of your ideology?
I think it was ideology. I don't think we had a formal relationship with the party. Um, I think there was a recognition that we existed from the main party, the CPI-ML, and Charubabu knew about us. He did take shelter in a worker comrade's house who was in Delhi. I never met him. But we had no formal links. And when we landed in Bihar, and we were in the area of Purnia and Katihar, we promptly fought with the local Naxalite chaps. So we were basically on our own. And as in my book, I do a lot of research on this and talk to various people who went to Assam, who went to Bihar, who went to Himachal, and my brief encounters, what we did in Calcutta. I think we were all trying to really grope and explore. But the main problem for us and for me was how to declass myself. And declassing, it came very useful when I became a reporter, because we were upper class kids. I mean, I had no idea of a village, you know. I was sort of born in a. My mother was a Hindu, became a Christian. My father was a part of a Christian missionary movement which stretched back nearly 200 years ago, and goes back to Young Bengal and Derozio, and built many schools and colleges in Calcutta. And I really didn't know my caste even, so we got completely, finished, in Bihar, because the first thing they asked you what caste you belong to. So you had to really scratch your head. So declassing ourselves was a big thing. And this is something which, as a young reporter, when I became a young reporter, one of my first assignments which Nikhil Chakravarti gave me was to cover the UP elections of 1974, early, I think it was in February, from the village. So I would actually go and stay in a village and cover the elections. And, which nobody else obviously could, because I was used to staying in a village. So it was this whole thing of looking at life through the eyes of people who were poor, who were marginalized, who were completely disconnected with the average readership of your newspaper.
So why did you need rescuing? What was it that you were up to that you needed rescuing from another
Oh,
city?
right. Okay, no, rescuing meaning in the sense that I had no job. I didn't want to go back to college. I was told that the police may have been looking for me, but because my father was a senior bureaucrat, I think there was no formal case against me. So that was helpful. A lot of my friends, mind you, had been arrested, had been tortured. Some of them were killed. So I've had a whole varied, nothing like that happened to me. I wasn't even interrogated by the police, again, partly because I think of my father's influence, but also because I didn't really actually do something which they could pin on me. So, but I was rescued in the sense that somebody gave me a direction, somebody gave me a job, and I just fitted into this world of the media so easily.
So were there other friends of yours who also went into a reportership? Did
Well,
you choose to report, or was it like
No.
something
I
like
mean that was
serendipity?
yeah. Meaning why I didn't go on the desk.
Why didn't you do anything else? How did you come to
No,
report?
this was because this is the only thing I could do. I could write a bit. Max, my senior, came to newspaper in English, so I could write quite well, always. So, but this was easy. This was the only skill set I had, I think, at that time. So that's why I came to journalism. I couldn't think of anything else.
Right. So you joined journalism in 1973. You started
Yeah,
as a
right.
reporter in 1973, and you were talking about there was a big lead story. You were covering one of the JP.
That is in
rally
75.
2075, just before the emergency.
Yeah.
So, what was the story? Were there other people? How did the network of journalists work in terms of reporting these events?
Okay, so usually what happens is that these stories are covered by special correspondents. There are reporters and special correspondents. A reporter's life varied from 10 years to 50 years, in the sense that you could have reporters who were 60 years old. Our senior crime reporter was Vidya Ratan Mitra, dear old guy, still alive, and drunk all the time, even then. And he was on drinking terms with every SHO in town. But I mean, he was there. I mean, he was a figure in, circle. So, and very similar to, places in Chicago and this, that, the other. I mean, you have these old grizzled guys who probably couldn't write to save their lives, and I used to write with us most of. So he was so grateful to me, and for that he would take me around. He'd become very fond of me. Much older than me. So you had that kind, and then of course you had young whippersnappers like me who were coming in, who's smoking a joint, filing a story, it's just completely, different class, different background. But again, we used to complement each other. I mean, Vidya and I made a great team, so that was that.
So you talk.
So we were talking about this
Yeah, that's right.
political reporter.
Yeah.
So most reporters were kept into doing all this, stuff which was city reporting, right? So it wasn't overtly political. There was city politics, but even in city politics, you had to be a senior reporter to cover city politics. The junior most beat was crime.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
which of course we felt was the most exciting. And those days, you could really hit the front page. And in PaRChA, and in the Indian Express, both these papers gave a lot of play to crime news. So we were competing against each other, Indian Express and PaRChA and everything, to get the great crime story in. So there was a lot of pride, but of course, politics was the big thing. And so usually it was the special correspondents who would cover it. And that why I was thrilled, because I was allowed, as a reporter to get in, and such a young reporter at that. Maybe because I think they were aware of my political background and everything. But, it's just that, they thought that I'd write it. I was also known as a good writer. So they wanted, that was a big, those days in a place like PaRChA, not many people wrote very good English. So if you wrote English well and had a gift for imagery and, words, that really helped.
Right. So you talk a couple of times about cultivating these sources.
Yes.
Right. That of course also has changed. I mean, I know my friends, and what sources mean to them is very
Yeah.
different from what it would have meant to you. So can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. So sources were really important. Now, guys like Vidya, and he's a classic example. He were friends. These sources were his friends. These were his drinking buddies. So they trusted him completely. And these were cops who would tell them every damn thing. So for somebody like me, it was so incumbent to go with Vidya at, in the evening, drink rum after rum, and get to hear what was happening. And then you get to know that guy. He also trusts you, cultivate him, And of course, we had no cells or everything, but we used to call up and this and that.
But what did cultivation mean?
Cultivation meaning that you keep in touch with him.
Right.
There's no question of, we had no money to give him.
Right.
Okay? So, in fact, they had all the resources. In India, of course, you have this very strange thing that journalists are cultivated by sources, in the sense that you are taken out by sources. It never is anywhere else in the world. But this is a amazing place. But, that's how you cultivate. And then and this carries on through your life, because there are some people you trust. And they trust you, and therefore they know that you won't expose them. And you try and have several sources so that you can talk to one source and then you check it with another source who you equally trust. But it's not a single source story then. So that's what, sources are so important for journalists.
So during the emergency, how did your sources work? Given that there was such a huge clamp down and people were very scared of talking, you didn't know who to trust.
Obviously, people were very scared, and I think that to some extent it wasn't just the formal censorship which stopped us. It was also the sources really was absolutely scared shitless. Um, but at the same time, people talked. People were also very sort of upset at what was happening. And although a lot of the stuff we wrote in the book came in our investigations as soon as the emergency was over, because then, of course, the floodgates, opened. Quite a bit of stuff also we got, our notebooks of the emergency were basically, uh, you know, through sources who spoke.
And these sources are mainly in the police force or elsewhere also?
Well, because we were crime reporters, we had a lot. But John, of course, had excellent sources in the Municipal Corporation of India, which he covered. So, the Municipal Corporation of India also had a lot of the city reporting. So, our book was about Delhi under emergency. It's called For Reasons of State, Delhi under emergency. So, how Delhi worked, the Municipal Corporation was a very, very important part. And then, of course, was the Delhi administration. It's very strange that some of these guys are now friends of mine. I had a wedding night before last with Naveen Chawla and his wife, Gopika, and they're now friends. But he was the terror of the emergency and actually used to rule Delhi because the Lieutenant Governor, poor Krishan Chand, was just you may have heard, he was just a puppet. So, Naveen used to rule. So, all these sources in Delhi administration and municipal corporation, among the police, of course, and then, of course, amongst teachers' unions, government teachers' unions. So, a lot of them, were a part of journalist world. In the old city, there were a lot of these local Muslim organizations, the Imam, then, of course, some of the political parties also, meaning the other political parties were all in jail, but the Congress itself, they didn't like what happened with Sanjay Gandhi. They didn't like Rukhsana Sultana at all, because she just came and she was like all la-di-da, and she was this socialite woman who was just coming in, and they hated her. So a lot of them also talked.
Yeah, but so most of my conversations and the interviews I've taken so far have been people talking about, everybody's looking over their shoulders and wondering if I should talk to this person anymore, should I talk to the other person anymore. So do you, for instance, remember a particular incident that depicts how, exchange of information was effective during the emergency, between even personally?
Well, a lot of the information, happened over a cup of tea. India Coffee House used to be our place where we used to meet earlier, but the emergency saw it, and one of the reasons why they demolished the India Coffee House was precisely because to stop journalists meeting their sources. So that's where we met our sources. So these obviously had to be private meetings, but I can't give you any specific instance of you looking, over your shoulder, because sources, you obviously made an arrangement and met. What did not happen was this drink in press club. Because press club, we heard, was full of spies. And that press club, people were there just listening into conversations.
Did somebody ever listen into your conversation and report it?
Fortunately, I was not really a press club guy those days. I couldn't afford booze. I was on charas or ganja, so I couldn't afford booze. I went with Vidya or somebody, and those days, of course, there was a lot of free booze around. By the way, a reporter's life wasn't necessarily miserable. Okay, you couldn't report, but there's lots of booze around. Paper Manufacturers Association and all these sort of places. Where they would give you booze. And then to my horror, and great meal, and then to my horror, the reporters would say, "और फिर घर जाने का टैक्सी का पैसे कहाँ है?" wanted to run away from the place, but that was the scene. Now, in these days of real terrible corruption in the media, these things seem very innocent, frankly. I mean, to me, but they wanted. I mean, these guys were very poor people. I mean, you got paid next to nothing, those days.
Right.
I mean, I got $300 salary. That's why this $5,000 the Guardian came as such a boon. But it was amazing that people would. So mostly this was this paper manufacturer. After they got drunk and every poor chap hanging around, and then they'd be told, "अच्छा कल story नहीं है, हम तो बहुत दारू पी लिया, हाँ, कल story अगले दिन आएगा." So I say, yeah, okay, just give me 2 paragraphs, you'll get, But that was it. So on the one hand, there was all this. I mean, you really look down on these, but they were also tough reporters. I mean, they had their, various sides, and on a good story, they'd really, they'd be very good. Of course, in the emergency, of course, there was no question of, publishing them.
Right. So, you were also talking about crime reportage and how the policemen were having a good time, not saying things because of, this is going to negatively reflect on the government. But crime reportage being non-political per se, in the sense that it was more and there are a lot of conversations about people actually being happy about the emergency because trains time pe chal rahe hain, ye time pe ho raha hai, us type ki ideas. What were those conversations that came out in your reporting, the non-political things which you were forced to report during the emergency in any case?
No, those were things we picked up. I mean, very annoying to hear in middle class drawing room, not middle class but upper middle class drawing rooms. All this that very good, and family planning. I mean, I had horrible stuff about how this riffraff at least is being culled out, and what it, how it goes. That these illiterate people and this thing. There are too many of them, and really good things Sanjay Gandhi is doing. I mean, people would openly say that. Without even blinking. I used to get into a lot of fights, at these conversations. But there's no question of reporting these. So, I mean, as far as reporting is concerned, we stopped reporting during the emergency. There were all these developmental stories. We were taken on bank trips where we'd be witness to a landless laborer being given a buffalo. I remember one particular trip where this was a chap of Guha used to get very drunk, and then you start drinking from breakfast. So they used to really pile you with liquor. So Guha got very drunk, and there was this television lady interviewing this landless laborer. When Guha suddenly, out of his drunkenness, woke up, snatched the mic and went to the buffalo and started interviewing the buffalo of how it felt to be given to a landless lady. I was stuck in my mind in those amazing days. But we did nothing basically. We just, hung around, really farted around, did absolutely nothing.
Right. I can see you looking at your watch, so I'll ask.
No, it's okay. We've got a little time.
So you were talking about, you had never expected the emergency. But there had never been an emergency. So what was the concept of the emergency? I mean, did you have any concept of what an emergency might be ever like?
Coming in?
You said that when there was an internal emergency, there had already been an external emergency, and there had never been an internal emergency. Nobody had ever seen an internal emergency. So what, to a newspaper office, did you have any concept that such a thing could ever happen?
No, before it happened, we didn't. After all, this was an emerging thing which we got to sort of know about as we encountered it. So as I told you that right at the beginning when I walked in, I had absolutely no clue what an emergency was. It was the first time it was happening. In the media, we knew that meant that you couldn't report freely, and in some cases not report at all. But all the stuff that happened, I don't think there was a priori kind of concept of the emergency. I think even the people who were implementing the emergency didn't have a clue what they were going to do.
Right.
And they were twisting and turning and just letting it carry on, hoping that this would completely crush all dissidents, and then they ultimately they would rule forever. Mark Tully says that D.K. Barua, who was the president of the Congress, he's written this in his foreword to my book, that D.K. Barua told him that Mrs. Gandhi would have never ever ordered elections had she not been certain that she was winning. So I don't think that they really thought that the emergency would be over. They thought that they would be taking India to a totally different thing, much in the lines of many other third world countries. Mind you, India is quite an aberration in the kind of democracy we have. So they thought that very soon you'll have this one party government.
Right. So you were also talking about Sanjay Gandhi and his fight with your editor,
Right. Edatata Narayanan.
I keep like his anyway. What was this fight about exactly?
So you see, what happened was that in the beginning, as I told you, Edatata Narayanan decided, and we were the only newspaper. Even Chalapati Rao in National Herald did not support the emergency. He didn't write against it. We were the only newspaper when papers were allowed to come out, which praised the emergency, which said that this is a blow against the CIA, blow against the right wing, blow against the Jute press. So he hated the Times of India. So I remember him that day when he walked in cackling, and we shitted his guts. We worshipped him in one way because he was a hell of a sweetheart. He was an honest guy and lived so simply. But he was also really, really totally eccentric. So I remember him saying, I believe, he used to speak like, I believe Girilal Jain has gone home with a headache. So he was, I think, basically he was enjoying himself because all the other guys had got screwed. So I think that was it, basically old boy was really very strict. But, as very characteristic of him, they tried to put pressure on him in giving a lot of coverage for Sanjay Gandhi. Now, one thing you couldn't do with the old boy, you couldn't tell him what to do. So I think Vidyacharan Shukla tried to tell him that, and he said, you black out this bastard's name, and you black out his photograph also. Because the photographer says, you black him out. So poor chap, news editor saying, but sir, it's going to be totally, the picture will look very odd. Doesn't matter. Black him out. So suddenly, Sanjay Gandhi stopped existing for PaRChA.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. So that, I think, annoyed the Youth Congress a lot. Crazy man, So then one night, I remember this Lalit Markin who got shot and whose nephew Ajoy Markin now is a big shot Congress leader. He landed up with his gang. And they were really, they were threatening to do something to the office, whether burn it down or anything. So I remember it was like after midnight and we were all there and talking to those guys, a mixture of bluster and litmus. We knew all these guys. So, Lalit was really, but finally, they went away. But it was very scary. They were rough guys, those Youth Congress guys at that time. Nothing compared to the damn bloody guys you find now. Those guys with, as I say, every time it gets worse. It gets worse, yeah. But, that was that.
So the thing is, it's very interesting for me to see that a lot of the Youth Congress people were people your age, right?
Yeah.
And then Sanjay Gandhi is also more or less the same class as the journalists who are reporting about him,
sure.
and there circles that overlap
right, sure,
in that
sure.
sense. How was that space negotiated where there was like completely diametrically opposite views and people were fighting, and suddenly it had become like a blood war?
Well, Sanjay Gandhi was a guy who never had friends in the media. Firstly, he wasn't a politician. He was completely outside politics. Ambedkar people we knew, they're still friends. But Sanjay we didn't know at all. And therefore, he saw the media as an annoyance. and he never ever wanted to, throughout his career, never ever wanted anything to do with the media. And therefore, I mean, there's no question of, engaging with him, class or this thing. Sanjay, of course, I mean, it's weird because Sanjay obviously had another life because Mala Singh tells me that she went around with Sanjay for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, these are old days. I mean, these were families who were close with Thappars, and mind you, Ramesh Thapar was another godfather of mine. But this was not before the emergency happened, but just after the emergency when I wrote my book. So Ramesh and Raj used to love me a lot. But anyway, so Mala says that. So obviously Sanjay had another life, but it had nothing to do with the media or public life.
Right.
Okay. And unlike Rajiv, who had a gang of friends and everything, and he was quite a social guy, Sanjay, from all accounts, was very, very private. I mean, even his very good friend Dumpy, who's now again a friend of mine, and Dumpy is a real subversive, uses a lot of bad language, but he's a sweet guy actually. He also used to say that Sanjay is like never wanted to meet anybody, never this. He had his own sort of life. So as far as the media is concerned, he had nothing to do with it.
Right. So, and then of course there was Maruti that happened, and when his plane crashed, there was a lot of reporting and about how Sanjay had been warned to not do these acrobatics so close to the ground. Was there also a media, bias about, Sanjay Gandhi, now we can report about him? Did that happen at any point of time?
No, that is after the emergency is over.
Yeah, after the emergency is over.
They went at him. They went at him. They really went at him. And as usual, what happens with the media, I'm afraid I have a very dim, view of the media because they get very easily cowed, and then when the person who is bullying them becomes a victim, then they really jump on him, and I can predict for you next year this is exactly what's going to happen to Modi. All these guys, all these anchors who say Mr. Modi, so this thing, is going to be totally ulta. So, they went at Sanjay. They really went at Sanjay. And he was in jail. And so there were a lot of reports. And there was this particular report. I'll tell you a little story about Indira Gandhi. What happened was that Sanjay went to jail, and there was this guy who later became a politician and a member of parliament. I will not take his name. So he was a reporter those days, and he went and did a fake interview with Sanjay, saying a lot of things against his mother. Okay? Now, so Sanjay was obviously furious and Indira Gandhi was furious. Okay? So this is the background. So here we are following Indira Gandhi on a trail. So there is me, there's MJ Akbar, there's David Housego of the Financial Times, and there is this guy. So we meet her at the circuit house. She's very thrilled. She knows me, she knows MJ, I think she knew David, I think she met him once. This guy she didn't know. Anyway, so she's very sweet. She said, come have lunch and everything. She can be so charming. And, those days she was in the opposition, she wanted publicity and everything. So, and we were going to have an interview with her. So just before that, she suddenly turned to this guy and said, what's your name? I know. And this guy said, I tell you something, I never seen somebody change from this really amiable person to just incandescent fury. David tells me that he's been through every battle zone in the world, but that was the scariest thing he had come across. He said, oh my God, she just exploded. So, yeah, Sanjay really, people went really at him. So a lot of stuff came out. And
but
all
this
that.
person's interview was published?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And the editor had no issues with publishing a completely fake interview?
He thought that he was, the right, this thing interview. And this guy claims that Sanjay told him, It's a he said, she said sort of thing.
Oh, right. So he's
Yeah.
even today, he does not claim that it was a fake interview.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
will actually
absolutely,
happen.
absolutely. I think it was a fake interview. I don't think Sanjay would say something about his mother like that.
What did he say?
Something about, I slapped her or something about her. Yeah, something.
Wasn't it Ian Jack also said
Ian
something
Jack
to the
quoted
effect
that.
of?
Ian Jack quoted that.
He was
Yeah, I
quoted,
mean,
no?
there's all
He
rumors and all
says
that.
that I was there in the same room, but it was
No, no, no. He wasn't in the same room. It was basically Ian was quoting somebody who's, Ian is too good a journalist to say that. I mean,
Right.
yeah. But there was some talk that Sanjay was, but Sanjay wouldn't certainly tell this guy this. And a couple of other quotes which are controversial. And this thing, I don't think Sanjay would have talked to him like that. I doubt it. So I think that parts of the interview were made up. I'm not denying that he didn't spoke to the guy. I'm sure that he may have spoken to Sanjay, but I think that quite a bit of it may have been,
fabricated.
which is not the first time. I mean, media does it. I mean, not the first time.
Why
So,
not?
so you've never been a part of. Have you been
No,
a
no, I'm
journalist
not a
ever?
journalist
So
at all.
yeah.
So this brings me to Sanjay Gandhi's death, and where he was seen the political successor of Indira Gandhi, and the dynasty was supposed to continue, and then suddenly he dies.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened in terms of reporting Sanjay Gandhi? Because right now you're all like, okay,
No, when I'll tell you because it has a personal. What happened was that when Sanjay came back, when Indira Gandhi came back, and Sanjay became enormously powerful, all the guys I wrote about in the book became really powerful. Jagmohan was just shot up to become Lieutenant Governor of Delhi from DDA Vice Chairman. Bhinder became the Commissioner of Police, the Police Chief of Delhi. Jagdish Titler became really powerful. And so everybody was telling me, baby, you're going to really get it now. I mean, it's all over for you. So, and then I had a burglary in my place. Everybody was convinced that, they, got it done. I mean, KK Paul, who used to be the South Delhi SP and who's now the governor of Uttarakhand, he just, I think maybe my servant was a part of it or something, but it wasn't a political thing. But everybody thought about it. So there was this big fear what they would do. There's no question about it. And I think that in the beginning, I think people were a little scared about how we should report the Sanjay Gandhi story. I wrote in Sunday. I mean, and I must say that MJ Akbar supported me fully those days. There's an interesting backstory to this. And then, of course, I mean, it was just out of the blue. I mean, I think it was around early morning when I heard this, that Sanjay had crashed, and, so we rushed to Safdarjung Flying Club, and, it was like completely, just changed everything. So now comes the backstory. So obviously, me being the Sanjay Gandhi expert, having read a book, I've written the book and everything, I always wrote the Sanjay Gandhi story. So I used to ring up Akbar in the phone, and those days there's nothing called a STD or anything. Okay, we had a demand trunk call. So you had MJ was very fast, and we used to plan the issue in about 6 minutes. It was 6 minutes, and then if you had to extend it, so another 3 minutes. So we very quickly, going through, I said, so I'll do the main story, do you want to do a story? And suddenly MJ tells me, Ajoy, I think you shouldn't do a story. I said, what are you talking about? This is Sanjay's death. I mean, we have to look at his legacy, we have to look at, ahead, what. He said, no, I think that you should back off. I was really astounded. I said, who's going to do the story? Are you going to do the story? He said, no, I also decided I won't write. And so I said, then who? He said, I was thinking of 3 people. One is Khushwant Singh, big Sanjay Gandhi chamcha. Dom Morris, another total Sanjay Gandhi chamcha. And Khushwant Singh.
No, you already.
Sorry, Khushwant and Barun Sengupta. Barun Sengupta, who's this other, very, very close to Sanjay types. So it's only later, of course, when he joined the Congress, I realized that was the time he was trying to get into the Congress, and he didn't want to, So it's only later a lot of things fell into place. But earlier on, when I was writing about Sanjay, I must say that both Avik and MJ stood by my side, and we covered him pretty sort of.
So yeah, we'll talk about the
Yeah,
20-point program
yeah.
and the demolition and the 5-point program. One thing that I'm particularly interested in when these things come across, there's always this whole secular is a very stupid word for it, but there's always people who are turning it around.
Just cancel the entire thing. Okay,
I
don't do
will,
that, yeah.
I will. I'll take away the
Yeah,
story.
yeah,
Don't worry.
yeah.
So yeah, again, 5-point program, 20-point program. So whenever there is a program that is particularly nasty, there's always people who are talking about it and inverting it into new things. And there is in the democratic lingua franca, there are various songs and things that come about it. Do you remember any such things that happened to the 20-point program or the 5-point program, like Chup Raho? So
No,
things like
the
that-
one slogan which I remember is there was a slogan called "Baatein Kam, Kaam
Kam
Zyada,"
Kam.
but it got because there was a big wrestling thing which was going on, and I think that emergency time there were a lot of these almost like gladiatorial, sort of gladiatorial shows in the Roman Empire. They did a lot of this freestyle wrestling.
Right.
Yeah, and so there was a big slogan, "Baatein Kam, Kusti Zyada." So that was the sort of thing, that was a big joke. But there was, of course, this 5-point program, 20-point program, and these were constantly being, blasted over the radio, because radio was a big thing those days. So every damn program was interrupted for these sort of things. And in terms of these hoardings also, there was Sanjay Gandhi's hoarding, Indira Gandhi's hoarding. Indira Gandhi is with the 20-point and Sanjay Gandhi with the 5-point.
But do you remember any of the songs or any of the sayings that came across during that period because, of these programs or other things that were happening during the emergency? Things that became proverbial.
Nothing really strikes me. I mean, of course, there was D.K. Barua's famous saying, "India is Indira and Indira is India." I mean, that was his
But that's
famous
like
one.
from the top. I'm talking
Yeah.
about more on the ground.
Oh, on the ground.
Yeah.
You mean what people used to
But people tend to invert these things, right? They make jokes about it.
But I tell you what, one thing which you did not see that much during the emergency, at least in Delhi, was Sanjay Gandhi's and the Youth Congress doing a lot of propaganda. And that is why I think in the book we also call it a statist coup rather than a political coup. Because I don't think there was any mass movement, unlike say, and so it would be wrong to call us fascists because there were no stormtroopers really. And okay, the Youth Congress guys came and threatened us at Patriot office, but they were not that much in evidence. Okay. It's not that that there was a very overt political presence of Sanjay Gandhi. Sanjay Gandhi was just this face, just this figure, almost a disembodied figure. There was no attempt by Sanjay Gandhi to hold a lot of rallies and convince people and create a public sort of feeling about it. This was very unique about the emergency. Indira Gandhi did her own little things because she was a mass leader from way before. But I would say that she did less during the emergency period than what she did before and after.
Okay.
So there were not many instances of some slogans which would be turned around. The other thing which I remember is that people were very scared during the emergency. So there was a certain passivity, and as it turned out, a certain misleading passivity about the people. Because when it came to, they waited. See, there was surprisingly little resistance to the emergency. Except for Turkman Gate, I don't think there was any major conflagration protesting against even sterilizations. I mean, there was something in Haryana, again to do with a Muslim pocket, but I don't think there was. There was surprising little resistance from the established political parties. The Jansangh almost collapsed. So there was hardly any of the activity, and even the other parties really did not, except the Naxalites, were already underground. Who kept on doing their thing. But apart from that, so when you say that there was a lot of talk in the public about the emergency, it actually wasn't. So people just took it. They grumbled, but it wasn't something which, it was very much in evidence. And that is why when they lost, when the emergency regime was ousted in such a decisive manner, it came to some extent as a surprise to all of us. Because there was no build-up to it.
Right. So you were talking about Turkman Gate and it being the only conflagration. How was Turkman Gate, the reporting of Turkman Gate as a conflagration, different from reporting a conflagration in a non-emergency period? Like there's a period where you're not supposed to be reporting.
No, very simple. I'll tell you where all the difference is. See, just before Turkman Gate was the Safdarjung, what was it called? Sadar Bazaar riots.
Right.
Sadar Bazaar riots, okay? Those are the first communal riots I covered in my life. And like a fool, which I later realized, I got into the middle of a firing encounter between Muslim snipers up on the roofs on one side and police firing from this side. So I got into the middle thinking that I'll get this thing, and suddenly found me to be in extreme danger. And I remember Nikhil Kumar rescuing me, saying, "Who's that boy? Who's that chap?" Has he gone mad? And it's only later I realized that as a reporter, you don't do that. You get into a vantage point where you are not in danger and you can see, what is happening. Now, in Turkman Gate, there was no question of getting close. So you won't have access. As a journalist, you manage to muscle your way through all these police barricades and everything. So all that stopped during the emergency. The cops their behavior towards reporters completely changed. I mean, nowadays it doesn't happen all that much. It has started happening a little bit now. Earlier on there was a lot of street reporting to be done. Every second day there was a demonstration. And we would be all there, city reporters. And, my favorite person was Pravaa Dutt, mother of PaRChA Dutt, because she was just a formidable figure. She'd be in a sari with a bindi, but swearing fluently in Punjabi. So we'd all go behind Pravaa. So Pravaa would be swearing away and breaking the barricade, and we'd be all following her. I still remember. I tell PaRChA that you should have seen your mother. It's quite amazing. So, but we were there, right there. And the cops used to, obviously, as I said, there was a huge amount of respect and fear for the media. Now that changed, the whole equation changed. So, and that was one of the big sort of, frustrations being a journalist during the emergency. Because suddenly that power equation had changed. The cops didn't give a shit about it. Because you couldn't write anything about it.
So when you stood at Turkman Gate, you say you're standing far away. And
far away, yeah, basically.
But you did not report that. You could not have reported.
You couldn't. There was, I think, 2 paragraphs which we said take the agency. I mean, those days we told the desk to take agency.
So everybody just took their own notes
Yeah,
and did
yeah,
not actually
yeah,
manage to-
absolutely. There was no question of writing anything. I mean, you were not allowed to write.
Right. So Indira Gandhi's election post the lifting of the emergency, and she loses the election. So I'll not talk about the election immediately after, but when Indira Gandhi comes back and you're talking about how she was a trailblazer. Now sentiment has shifted, right? Like you're anti-Indira Gandhi, then you're like, okay, what is this government doing? And then you're suddenly pro-Indira Gandhi again, right?
Sure.
So how did the memory of the emergency influence how you were reporting about Indira Gandhi's election trail?
See, I must say that despite the very, very unpleasant experience we had during the emergency, we did see Indira Gandhi's decision to hold elections. Now, mind you, these elections resulted in her winning. We'd have a completely different attitude. But the fact is that she allowed herself to be defeated. And I think a lot of us forgave her because of that. I think psychologically our attitude changed towards her dramatically when we saw her and Sanjay getting defeated. And that she herself cried in front of Jayaprakash Narayan. The fact that she rode on that elephant in Belchi, the fact that she made a monkey out of the CBI guys saying handcuff me, and I witnessed all that, to some extent proved that what a consummate politician she was and what prize asses these guys were. So, I mean, come on, I mean, we were fair, so whatever bad things she may have done during the emergency, she this time was fighting totally, on same level political ground, and she used their weaknesses. So, and she got back, legitimately. So, we saw it as a great political comeback.
So, and how was the reporting of the Shah Commission connected to this? Shah
You
Commission
know,
really went up.
I know that I did. John and I, after our book became this big iconic book on the emergency, got this prize assignment from Orient Longwins. I mean, this was just sheer luxury. I don't think I ever do a book in such luxury. They gave us a Lutyens bungalow, a secretary, Orient Longwins. Must be government was very happy to have this book being done on the Shah Commission. So we were supposed to write a 3-volume thing.
Right.
Can you just look at this? What was I saying?
We were talking about Shah Commission and
Right.
Orient Longwins.
So this was a 3-volume series. The Shah Commission begins, the Shah Commission continues, the Shah Commission ends. Okay. So we did we attended the hearings and did the first volume. The Shah Commission begins, and then this whole trouble started in the government. Everything collapsed, and so the entire book project fell through.
Oh.
So there was no Shah Commission, continues and Shah Commission ends. There was only that first Shah Commission begins, which is few copies are floating around, I think, somewhere.
Right.
And it basically puts into perspective, in chapters, various things which the Shah Commission looked at. The Shah Commission report, final report, is, Mrs. Gandhi actually tried to destroy it when she came back, the report itself. But it's been resurrected and it's still, it's now available on the net.
Yeah.
So you can actually look at their final report. Obviously, it could not carry on any intensive investigations. All the emergency excesses, there's just a sort of broad report on it, but not really properly investigated. All the witnesses and this, that, the other. But I remember attending all the Shah Commissions,
So where was the sentiment at this time in the journalism circle? Did you want, were you pro-Shah Commission, anti-Shah Commission?
No,
How were
I
you
think
reporting?
I think Justice Shah sounded very fair and stern, but fair. And we were quite. I think I was quite supportive, of course, because I was part of the, writing a book on it. Journalists, if you ask me, there were pro-Congress journalists, and they certainly didn't fit in to the other side. And therefore, they obviously would support the Congress. I mean, journalists did have political sympathies.
Right.
And some of them did, I think, prosper to some extent during the emergency. So those guys certainly were against it. So the journalists were divided. But we could see that these guys hadn't quite got their act together. So as the chaos increased in the Janata government and the infighting started, support for them started waning amongst journalists. And support for Indira Gandhi to some extent got restored. So these things went hand in hand. And therefore, I think it's a part of the emerging political realities, in India. That started influencing, I think, media opinions as well.
Right. So the 42nd Amendment was actually implemented just before Indira Gandhi lifted the emergency, right? If I'm not wrong. And there were a lot of powers that were taken away, and that to give the government a lot of powers. Was there not also the reporting of? Were you able to report that? Did you report that later? Did the journalist cycle? Now of course the 42nd Amendment is remembered because it included the word secular and things like that, and a lot of other things are forgotten about it. So how was a constitutional change reported at the time, or was it reported later?
See, let me put all this in perspective. Although Mrs. Gandhi did change around the constitution, she could have done it far more drastically. This is the point which 1 year ago Srinath Raghavan in a piece mentioned, and I think that's an important point. It's a debate, I think, within Indira Gandhi of how far she could go. I remember asking her about this, and she claimed that she was a little uncomfortable with this. She said, don't quote me, but I was uncomfortable with what was happening. So I never really quoted her ever, on this. But the fact that she didn't go whole hog and change the constitution entirely, she could have. She had the majority to do that. She had 2/3 majority. And there were people who were advising her to do it within the party. That, this is your chance, do it. But she did not. She did not change the entire constitution to have made her position completely secure. I have a feeling, and that is my reading of Indira Gandhi's side, through my conversations with her, that she felt that after a few years of the emergency, she could convince people that this was the right step she had taken. It would get popular support, endorsed with an election, and then she would continue as a popularly elected leader. Not a complete, somebody who had no relation to democracy. I think that is why I feel that her association with Nehru and all the father figures of the freedom struggle, the fact that she was with Tagore, that atmosphere she grew up, some of it must have seeped through. Some of it, and her self-image, and I think in these questions, self-image matters a lot. I think she would have respected herself less if she had totally changed the constitution. She just tweaked the constitution. So when we look at 42nd Amendment, these are tweakings, and it didn't completely change. So she felt she was required to have an election. Otherwise, she had the kind of powers at that point in 76. If you look at 1 year after the emergency, when she decided to postpone the elections by 1 year, to completely change the constitution. You could have completely changed it into a presidential form. You could have done anything to the constitution. You could have rewritten the constitution.
Right, it's very funny that when we were in school, how we read about the 42nd Amendment, it included such good things like,
she did, of course,
secular,
because she felt, because she felt, and mind you, those days she was very much taken up with the Soviet Union as well.
Yeah.
She, very strange, because she started out by backstabbing the communist government, and she was very right wing in the beginning. But anyway, at that point she felt that she wanted to be a benevolent dictator, but she didn't like the word dictator.
Oh, she wanted to be popularly elected.
Popularly elected. So she's a popular leader.
Right, but this was a big change for India, like for constitution to be. Even then, it was a big
No,
change.
no, absolutely. I mean,
How
it
was
was.
it reported? Like, was it 2 paragraphs or was it like a longer thing? How
No,
was
no, no. It was a
the
very matter of fact, factual reportage because it was happening during the emergency.
tone? Right.
So there was no question of any criticism.
So there was a full page reportage.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. I don't remember exactly
yeah.
what because I wouldn't deal with it.
Right.
There'll be some special correspondent who'd do it. But we're absolutely content for the guy who's doing it because he just had to just put it together. That's all. And I guess in the PaRChA, if I remember correctly, they would look at secular and socialist. Socialist was there earlier. It was secular, right?
Secular was the one.
Secular was the one. So, I mean, we had no problems with the word secular. So we'd look at, probably highlight the secular. I mean, I don't remember exactly when. Was it before Narayanan had the fight with Sanjay Gandhi? I think it was before. I think it was probably before. So, yeah, I mean, secular would be fine.
But it was February 1976. So.
Oh, right. So it was before the fight.
Yeah.
Before the fight. So I think PaRChA would have done a very sort of rah-rah report on very good, very good.
Okay, final question. The emergence of investigative journalism, or what you call the AP style of journalism. The Antule case is very important in defining how journalism post that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And for my generation, perhaps it's Tehelka and the.
Yeah, sure.
And so, how did this journalism, especially the Antule case, how was it reported? Did you report anything on that at all?
No, obviously. Antule was based in Bombay, the whole investigation in Bombay and everything. And so we didn't have much to do with it. I mean, obviously, the political ramifications of it, the fact that Antule had to resign, all that thing obviously played out quite big time.
Right.
But I mean, the fact that investigative journalism of that kind was certainly unique in India, and therefore, it started a whole series of investigations, by Indian Express and several others. Mind you, Indian Express at that point also marked itself, and I would say covered itself with glory. More, to my mind, I think that those which are not remembered that much is to look at the state of prisoners in jails, the under trial investigation, which is a fabulous investigation, and that was actually people going out to various jails, collecting documents and this thing. It did not fall into this, this document all covered, tied up nicely with ribbons. And I think emergency again, post-emergency, that saw the emergence of this kind of journalism, which wasn't there before. The kind of field on the spot investigative journalism.
Right.
I mean, it's not that it did not happen before,
right?
But I think many more people started writing, and I think that was also a result of magazine.
The format allowed.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you stuff which I did. I went to Dhanbad, and for the first time, I exposed the coal mafia. Suryadev Singh, Sahadev Singh, and all these people. And people told me there, the police and the IAS guys who became friends, that don't come back because we can't protect you. So we've given you the story, go back, but don't come back. They'll try to drag you back. But if you come back with army protection. So I remember that I think one of these Pelwans, they're called Pelwans, filed a case. So MJ got very excited. He said, let's go and fight it, and this, that, and the other. I said, are you crazy? They want to drag you in Patna so that you and I will be burnt alive, at the station itself. You'll be bashed up so bad, So, I mean, that sort of journalism, and there were the Bhagalpur blindings. There were, Abdi did that story again for us on Sunday. So we did a lot of great stories. Not just Sunday, but lots of people, Indian Express, and So that I think is the kind of glory days of Indian journalism. And I mean, I must say that it does come now and then. Neha Dixit has done some great work, and we have great names, in journalism who actually done on the field, not out of documents, but out of really painstaking research of talking to people, and very courageously, facing fairly intimidating figures, on the ground, so I think that was a post-emergent phenomenon. I don't think before the emergency you had too many of these stories. I think that is because I think newspaper proprietors, newspaper editors got much more interested in this. And again, that was also a part of these stories about sterilization and everything what was happening on the ground.
So, but do you think it is a post-emergency phenomenon simply because of the format of the news that was allowing it, or what was it post-emergency amongst journalists that prompted
Well,
this?
I think the media started valuing itself more in some ways because its freedom was taken away. You know what happens that when something's taken away for you, you realize the value of it.
Right.
And I think that's what really, made the media into much more of a high-profile, public institution. Earlier on, it was, the editorials, and there was some. I mean, I'm not saying there was some newspaper coverage, and as I said, the crime reporting and everything was, given its due. But I think this was much more of a national, more calculated, more overt phenomenon of investigative journalism. Investigative journalism became a category, and I think that wasn't there before. It was only a part of regular journalism. So I think the media was fairly consciously trying to define investigative journalism.
Fine. I've asked my questions. Is there something that you want to talk about you haven't talked about?
We talked too much.
I think we've talked enough. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But,